Good evening and welcome to the Feynman Factor. This evening my guest again is John de Massa-Airo, who is an initial Alexander teacher and teaches in France. And he has actually students everywhere, I think. I'll let him explain more about that. And today we're going to talk about a little bit more detail about the tools that are used during the teaching. Welcome, John.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yes,
good afternoon.
welcome, Mastane, and good morning. Good evening for you. Good morning for me.
That's right.
So the tools that we use in the lessons, first of all, we are talking about lessons that happen on Skype. We call long distance sessions, where one pupil is, in fact, having a discussion, a conversation with me. So it's a one-to-one lesson. And the first tool we use is in fact a video. Because when I have a lesson with a pupil, with a person, it can be a teacher of the Alexander Technique or not, or a trainee or not, the first idea is to see how a person will react to instructions, to verbal instruction of movements. So why is that so? In fact, it's because of course, I was trained as a teacher of the modern Alexander Technique with STAT UK, but also I translated the 4 books of Alexander into French. And the more I translated them, the more I saw very bizarre differences between what Alexander is writing in his books and what the state of the teaching was in the 1990s. And it was a great puzzlement very often. And so all this centers on a very, very important principle that Alexander is explaining in his books. So I have a quote ready here, and I will read the quote, and then I will stop a second and go back onto the quote to see what is of importance.
Yeah, okay.
Okay?
So
because that is fundamental.
Of Alexander's.
Yes, it's a quote of Alexander. It's a quote that is taken from the second book, Constructive Conscious Control of the Individual. And it's the 1923 edition that I'm using at the moment. And it's page 101. Okay. So Alexander is explaining his technique. What is it? What is his technique, basically? How did it start? Well, it started as a self-help technique.
Yes.
We have a person that suddenly realizes that what he is doing is not exactly what he thinks he's doing. So you understand the use of the video in this.
Yes.
Yes? Yes. Alexander very often is related to posture. But at the end of his life, when he was 80, he gave a talk in Stanford, in England, in a school for blind people. And he explained that he never liked the word posture or the word behavior. He's not interested in posture or behavior. Always been interested in the movement you do. So that's a statement at the end of his life.
So movement you do. So it's like in time, and something like time.
Some movement you do in time. Yeah. And so this is rather cryptic, but he gives an explanation just after that. And it takes that explanation from a libel case that he had in South Africa, where he attacked a scientist that was saying that he was a crack, that he was, in fact, a charlatan. And during the procedure, what happened is that the lawyer of the opposing party asked a commissioner from the tribunal to close his eyes and then raise both hands in the air, which he did, with an instruction. And the instruction was, raise your hands above your head and then drop them back at the same level. So that's what he did. And in fact, he was able to, steady his hands at the same level. That was a proof that one fundamental tenet of Alexander's theory was wrong. And what tenet is that we have a faulty sensory appreciation of the movement we do. So suddenly the lawyer thought he had a case. 3 days later, it was the concluding remarks of the two lawyers. And when it was time for Alexander lawyer to take the stand, he asked the opposite party, what had happened? What did you see? And the lawyer said, I saw the commissioner raise both arms and bring them back at the same level. And the lawyer said, is that all that you see? And the lawyer said, yes, it's proof. And the lawyer said, well, it's quite strange because we see no less than 8 movements that the commissioner did without ever knowing he was doing them. So you think, okay, good. There are movements happening when a person is intent in an action. We are not considering a person that is statically, staying there. No, the person is moving. And what is of interest is that Alexander, the young Alexander in particular, was very, very interested in the movements of the different parts of the torso. Right. That when the person is raising a hand, he could see that the person was interfering with the mechanism of the torso. So when you use the word mechanism of the torso, you imply that that torso is in fact articulated.
Yes,
that it's not one piece. Yes, and you remember certainly that Alexander started his path of discovery with voice problems and also breathing problems. And he is very clear about the fact that for most people, breathing is a subconscious act. That act is made mainly with the mechanism of the torso. The different movements of the different parts of the torso are not directed consciously by the person.
Yes, so let me just stop you there. Let me just explain that to myself. And so the idea of raising the hand, raising the arm, and not interfering with the mechanism of the torso is very, very fundamental to anyone who seeks a personal trainer or a physiotherapist or anything to do with studying movement. So it's not at all unique to the Alexander technique, but perhaps the solution is...
The solution is unique to the Alexander technique, and...
but the problem is almost at least for the populations
it's human.
It's a human problem, yes.
It's a human problem.
Yes.
Basically, breathing is a human problem. Yeah. Most people will forget about breathing most of the time, but it's still there. And many people use their hands. So, for example, to play music, you have to use your hands most of the time if you're not a singer. If you type a lot, if you work with your hands.
That's right.
There is a thing that appears here that nobody saw before, or that's the myth. That's the story. Yeah. Yes, we will see later that it's not exactly like that. But what is really new in the scheme that Alexander is proposing is that he proposes to give the person that wants to reeducate, to readjust the mechanism of the torso so that it can function well, because that's the underlying problem, is that when we interfere with the mechanism of the torso, of course we have a bad posture. It's the result of the movements. Yes? Yeah. We assume a posture. Well, to assume a posture, you need a movement or a series of movements, as we will see, because there are different parts. If there are more than 2 parts, you need a series of instruction for each movement in order to create a new relationship. So let's go to read what Alexander is saying. The point that is new in the scheme we are considering, which is this scheme, is that the pupil is asked consciously to give himself orders. These orders are evolved from the requirement not of a subconscious, but of a conscious reasoning use of the organism's orders and direction. Moreover, the satisfactory employment of which depends on the pupil's clear understanding, one, as to which of these orders are primary, to be given, but not to be carried out. That's what he calls inhibition. And two, as to which are to follow and to be actually carried out. So there is a scheme here. We have a process of self-reeducation. We have a process of self-readjustment. By readjustment, we mean that very often the different parts of the torso are moved in ways that are contrary to physical support. So the person has to, find a prop in order to be just working, to be just functioning, and cannot stand on our own feet. Yes, very often when people work with hands, for example, they find the need to find support somewhere.
Yeah.
Well, when we are talking about parts and movement of parts, we are talking of a supporting system. There are bones inside the body. When we say parts, you have to understand the moving parts have to have a rigid structure inside. That rigid structure is there. It's the bone and joint system. We call it a link system.
Yeah, and it's a mechanism.
It's a mechanism. Yeah, it's a mechanism. So Alexander said that he could see that his use of that mechanism of the torso was not appropriate when he was stimulated. Not when he was just sitting here and talking very gently. No. When he wanted to project his voice to the public on stage, which as a sort of performance fear attached to it. Then he could see that the simple fact of opening his mouth would affect how he moved the different parts of the torso.
Again, a universal problem.
Yes, a universal problem. He will use different ways to explain the same problem. For example, there is the problem of lifting the arm. There is the problem of opening the mouth. And later we'll see he's very keen on the problem of leaning forward with the torso. He says that when you ask a person to lean forward with the torso, you will find that the person interferes with the mechanism of the torso and that the person shortens and narrows.
Right.
So now he says, his scheme is to have the pupil order himself. And there are two kinds of orders. That's very, very important. So the first kind is are orders that you have to say to yourself, but never carry out. These orders are preventive orders. So it's very important in his idea to separate the two. So, fine, let's follow. And the first thing you want is to define which are these orders.
Yeah. The thing that jumps at me from a few years ago when I would have read that sentence that you quoted, and now, is that I will keep going in like a little mousey on a treadmill forever if I don't physicalize what he means by orders. If the orders are simply thoughts, then the system doesn't go anywhere.
No, but it's interesting. It goes somewhere. You will see. So the first orders are just thought, never to be carried out. So the first thing, you have to find them. You have to go through the books. You have to read everything you can about the Alexander technique to find which orders he's talking about. Because there are orders that follow these ones. The new means whereby orders, that's exactly how Alexander, in fact, labeled them. Yeah. And these orders are to be actually carried out by the pupil. You can imagine that when I was training, I came back to school the next morning with that very question, because it's quite easy to find out which are the preventive orders, because Alexander is clearly writing down, here are the preventive orders, and it's a sentence. So it's written in the books. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to the new means whereby orders that have to be carried out, there is very, very few direct indication by Alexander. There is only one in a chapter in the second book where he's talking about, it's a chapter called Illustration, and he's talking about a procedure called hands on the back of a chair. Mm. And at the start of hands on the back of a chair, you have a few orders that are described, and then just a little sentence saying that the new means whereby orders are always different at each slight stage of development of the student. So they cannot be put into writing. Oh. Dear, we haven't got a clear description of the sentence and orders that the student is supposed to be saying to himself and then carrying it out. Mm. So let's start first of all with the preventive order that should never get any sort of practical realization. And the sentence is very clear. It's let the neck relax, to let the head go forward and up, to let the back lengthen and widen. Mm. I think that Alexander was not very sure that people would understand this. That's why he places in different parts of his books and the later ones, like a paragraph of caution, so that people can understand. And so I have another quote that it's absolutely necessary to have for a teacher. I mean, a student will have to listen to what I'm saying and go back to the books, yes, and see if what I'm saying is true. But for a teacher, there is a big problem is what I'm saying, is that nobody nowadays realizes that the preventive orders, let the neck be free to let the head go forward and up, are preventive orders. People hope for this order to come true. They think, no, I know you laugh, but it's a fact.
I'm with you.
You're with me, yeah. They have this very bizarre idea that if you really think a thought strong enough and long enough, with the help of somebody, of course, providing what they think is the realization of the orders, you will suddenly be able to reproduce the deal.
Yeah, this is what I meant before when I mentioned that to bring them out into movements changes the game.
Yeah.
That's what I'm referring to.
Yeah, hear what Alexander is saying. We will suppose that I have requested the pupil to order the neck to be free and the spine to lengthen. Let's suppose that's what Alexander is saying. Let's suppose this. When you hear that, what is it you're hearing? You're hearing is talking about the preventive orders. Yeah, yes? Yeah. Neck free, head forward up, spine to lengthen. Fine. And then Alexander says, if instead of merely framing and holding in his mind this desire in his mind, he attempts the physical performance of these acts, he will invariably stiffen the muscle of his neck and shorten his spine, since these are the movements habitually associated in his mind with lengthening the spine.
Yes.
And the muscle will contract in accordance with the old association. Very interesting. In fact, it will be seen that in this and in all the other cases, stress must be laid on the point that it is the means and not the end which must be considered. So we are talking of an end. Let the neck be free to let the head go forward and up, to let the back lengthen and widen is a result, an end, and not a cause. And if you stop a second away from the tumult of the controversy. You think, okay, the mechanism of the torso is a system of linked parts, rigid bones that are moving relative to one another, and that is very, very clear when you think of the movement of breathing. You have to have different parts move together, and it's very clear that the torso can be bent many different ways. So, unbending the torso, for example, that we call lengthening the back or lengthening the spine, is a result of a series of movements of the different parts of the torso. So there we go back to the means whereby. The means whereby are orders, but at the same time they are acts. And Alexander is very clear in explaining that any physical activity, sitting, standing, playing golf, anything, you have to understand that these movements of the part of the torso are already ordered by the pupil, but unknowingly. The pupil, for example, when he bends forward, Alexander says he's bending forward, he's shortening the torso, shortening the spine, interfering with the mechanism of the torso. Well, the person is doing movements, so the video, the tool of the lesson, is the first tool, because the person does not realize that she's doing these movements when bending. But with some help of someone that has learned to see movements, well, it's easy to suddenly discover that in response to a command to, for example, lean forward with the torso, the person will see what are the different movements she's really doing. And then we enter in the scheme. Because in the scheme, the most important tool are the orders. The new means why orders. That's what the pupil will start using. So why preventive orders before entering into action? Why preventive? When I mean entering into action, entering in the technical action of ordering the different parts of the torso in order to create the form, the result, the end that we are after. Neck free, edge forward and up, back to lengthen and widen. Yes? How do you obtain a back to lengthen and widen? So, we start with
to see.
Yes, you have learned to see, and you have to learn to order. So, what are these orders made of? That's a very big question, you know, because most people think, well, you're asked to lengthen the spine. No, lengthening the spine is an idea, is a complex structural interactions of movements. So if you just think, let the neck be free, back to lengthen and widen, and even head forward and up, well, you're bound to do it according to what you feel is necessary in order to do it.
Yeah.
And you have to understand that if you do that, you run in a circle. The circle that you are mistaking the conclusion, which is you feel after the deed. Many people have this idea that then, if you know the feeling, you can direct the movements. Transforming a consequence into a cause is a very dangerous business in logic, but also in mechanics, which means that I thought that the technique was going to work. I had 3,600 hours. I went to see so many teachers. I went to see all the first generation teacher I could find and that would answer my questions. And at the end of my 3 years, when I saw myself on video, I suddenly realized that Alexander was talking about me. It didn't matter that I had 3 years behind me. I was still, no further into discovering how to consciously organize myself when subjected to stimulations. Of course, when I was sitting at rest, I could give the impression of having an organized torso. Well, but you should see my first talks on video, but it's well, a pity. So video have a way to tell a truth.
Yes.
It's not the absolute truth, of course, but there is a truth there. If you're bending, you're bending. And if you're bending by, creating unwanted movements that are contrary to the aim you project, then it is clear that you have some re-education to do and some re-education to learn. So the second tool is the orders. So what are these orders? Well, they are orders that define movements in space and movement in time.
Yes.
The first one, I will take the movement in time because I think it encapsulates the difficulty we are going to face. Very often, I ask the pupil for how long they project the orders. In Alexander's book, there are two different verbs. There is one that is to give orders, and the other one is to project orders. For example, the first kind of order, the preventive orders, you only give them. You never project them. Yes, they are only orders to remind you of the global result you're after before you start having specific orders that have to be thought one after the other and projected all together. And the danger, because these orders are ends in themselves, but they are not what we think of as movement. No, they are only defined as a movement of one bony part relative to another one, and never to be used alone, always together. So the first idea is order in time. So for how long do you project the new means by orders of movement of the different parts? And so I ask the student or the teachers, and they say, well, all day. Some of them project the orders all day. So if they have a job, it must be something complex. And it's very strange that no one has been thinking of the fact that we were talking of a conscious act. Alexander is very clear on the fact that projecting this order is a conscious act. It's not subconscious. It's not based on what you feel. So when you look at a conscious act, the first thing of a conscious act is you know exactly when it starts and you know exactly when it stops. So let's say we have given the pupil to understand 3 different orders of movements of 3 different parts that have to be thought, of course, separately, have to be understood separately. It's possible to describe a movement. So you will see that the discipline of description is a tool you cannot pass. Without discipline of description, it's impossible to give yourself conscious, reasoned orders.
It's impossible to create anything.
Well, it's impossible to create anything. Yes, that's correct.
Well, at least I'm just thinking about from a musical perspective.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. It's a score. Yes, and where you write the notes, and then you will perform the notes. So you have to have a plan. So the plan is in speech. That's why it's possible to have a lesson at 10,000 kilometers from one another. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
All that matters is that you receive your 3 orders and that you're asked to, well, first of all, see if you can understand each order separately, what they entail, which part is to move relative to what, and then you are asked to perform the 3 orders together, not one after the other. No, all together. So for the act to be conscious, we use a very simple tool. We use the counting mechanism. We said to the person, can you count 2 seconds by saying 1, 2, 3, so that there is 1 second between 1 and 2 and 1 second between 2 and 3. Well, most people are able to say 1, 2, 3. So we say, now, let's see if you can subordinate your doing to an instruction. Well, it sounds silly. It sounds very, very simple. But you then say, well, fine, now your film. You're going at the same time you say 1, you're going to start the 3 movement. You're going to continue the 3 movement while you say 2, and you're going to stop the 3 movement when you say 3. It's a basic conscious control procedure of a series of movements. Yeah? Well, you will be surprised to see a person that have never worked with thinking in activity. Thinking in activity is a label given by John Dewey to explain the new means whereby scheme.
Yes.
So that you can process different orders of movement, and you can form an intention of movement that is a global intention with the 3 movements. So you would be surprised. Most people, when at first of all, they don't want to say 1, 2, 3. They say that hinders their projection. Well, but it's a technique. So something you have to learn. The technique is not something innate and you're good at it. So fine. And you will see that the person has very, very great difficulty in fact starting the 3 movement at 1. Very often they start before they say 1. It's a difficulty to use language in order to command movement. People are not used to ordering in a strict fashion.
Yeah.
And also, you will find that, for example, when we say we bend the torso forward, you can set a start, that's where the person is, and you can define in space a point, a name, if you want, so that the person has a plan of where the movement is starting and where the movement should be stopping, so that when she says 1, 2, 3, she has to time how the movement is to evolve. Yes? So that involves another kind of tool, a very, very new kind of tool. It's what we call lines. Lines are, or planes, are geometrical structure that do not exist. They are just in your imagination.
So they're used for motor learning.
Yeah.
And so I might just insert here, do they have anything to do with the degrees of freedom problem? And putting them sort of, I might be going off track. We don't have, people can go and research that further somewhere else. It's okay.
Yes, because that's way ahead.
Yes.
Yes. Well, for the listeners, what Masteness just said is a fundamental theory of the founder of biomechanics called Nikolai Alexandrovich Bernstein. So yes, it has something to do with it, but it's if we have 10 more interviews, I will go into it. Yes,
okay,
for the moment, no. For the moment, just make something clear for the person so that they can understand and manipulate in their mind the concept of lines or plane that I'm using. For example, let's imagine I'm sitting. Yes, so as I'm sitting on a chair, my feet are further forward than my torso. Yeah, it's a fact. Okay. Yeah. And it's possible, for example, to, with my mind, isolate the front of the ankle. So the front of the ankle is a physical object in space right now.
Yeah.
And it's possible to construct a plane, or if you want, a line that you could see when looking at the person sitting from the side. You look at the person from the side, so you see the torso and you see the ankle, and they are not on the same plane. It's very clear that the front of the ankle is forward of the torso. So we can imagine a line. And we can ask the person, for example, to locate a very special spot on the bone system, on the anatomical structure. We say, for example, you have the top notch of the sternum. And the person can touch the top notch of the sternum, and we can ask the person to evaluate the distance between the top notch of the sternum and that imaginary plane that goes through both ankles. So there is a distance between the two.
Yeah.
And if you look at the person from the side, as is most of the time the preferred view in lessons, we start all the lessons with Alexander was looking at the person from the side. There is a reason for that, because first of all, we are going to look at sagittal direction, forward and backward. Yeah. So when the person has suddenly a notion that, yes, she can somehow more or less define where is in space, in actual practice, the front of the ankle. So it's somewhere in space.
Yes.
We can have person draw where she thinks her ankles are. When you feel that event, well, it's very easy now with the tools we are using to create a real line, vertical line passing through the front of the ankle. And you can judge whether the hand is seen to be further forward or not enough forward or on the line.
Yeah.
You will find that at first, when you ask somebody to define the space of movements, people are not very accurate at all. But that's a very strange thing. When you start playing with these ideas, you find that the student is progressing very fast, meaning that the visuospatial skills develop.
Yes.
And they develop more if you use language in order to direct your mind to work with them. So the tool of the lesson is the mind of the person. The mind of the person is going to be powered by the words, and by using these words and reflecting on it, she will start to create new skill she didn't have before. Because if you want to readjust the mechanism of the torso, you have to understand that this happens in space. And you have to develop the skill that help you to work with space or space element, distance, motion, acceleration. Yes, all these things, angular. So in the example I was using, then you will say to the person, okay, this is the top of your mechanism of the torso. We can locate the middle of the mechanism of the torso and the bottom of the mechanism of the torso. For the moment, we start with a very simple organization of the mechanism of the torso with 3 parts. Okay, and you ask the person to lean forward. But to lean forward and aim to connect the throat with the vertical line of the front of the ankle.
All right. Yeah.
You see, it's a problem. It's a mechanical problem. Yeah. Alexander calls it a psychomechanical problem because, of course, to succeed in the move, you have to, in fact, compute in your mind where you think the front of the ankle is. Yes? And then you will discover that when you bend, the rate of acceleration, because of course there is movement, so there is a speed, even if it's small, but there is a speed on 3 different parts, bottom part, middle part, and top part. And so you will find that when the person is going to aim for the target, first of all, at 3, she may not consider that she's on target.
On the count of 3, you're talking about the count of 3.
Yes, at the count of 3, she may. It's possible that she may consider that she's not on target. Yeah, she feels she's not on target. Okay, fine. But you're there watching a conflict of rules, because there is one rule that is, of course, evident, is that the person must connect the throat with the vertical of the instep. But at the same time, there is the other rule. You must stop when saying 3. So what happens when the person says 3 and doesn't feel she's there? Well, she will favor one rule before the other.
Yep. She'll either keep going or count slower. Or...
Yeah. And so Alexander is very clear about this. We don't care about the result. We care about rules. So rules are very interesting concepts.
So
for most people,
Just sorry, I'm going to stop you. So in that example, what we care about is that we made the video, we made the impression on the video, And that is the thing that trains the mind, the main tool that we were talking about.
Yes, because the person is going to see herself in the problem of learning.
Yes,
she will see that, of course, she's counting 1, 2, 3 and continuing to move. And so imagine, and it happens, that a person is seen counting to 3, and on video you see that the person is reaching the target. But then, instead of stopping where she should, she does not. She continues and overshoot. When you're looking at yourself in the situation, you think, what is in my head? Right. Why? It was perfect. Why did I continue? Because I felt I had to. I felt I was not on target. My feeling was not correct. I've been, in fact, directed by feeling instead of directed by conscious orders. Simple. It's a lesson.
It's a matter of practice. It's a matter of practice.
Okay. So then you will, next time, when the same configuration of rules appears, it's less likely that you're going to fall again and follow what you feel instead of following the orders. Yes? So the tools are all mixed together. Yes? And behind all this, there is the fundamental fact that the new means whereby orders are not what people call the directions, the conventional direction. The conventional directions, you will go back to the books and you will see that they are preventive orders, never to be carried out. They are just to give yourself an idea that we are dealing with the whole structure of movement, that if we want to change one of the movements of the whole structure, we need to go through organizing the whole. That's why it's presented in this way, neck free, head forward and up, back to lengthen and widen. There is the whole thing considered. But then, if you want to free the neck, if you want to lengthen the spine, even if you want to order your head to go somewhere and be successful, well, you have to organize the mechanism of the torso. That's what is called the indirect technique. Alexander has always repeated this, and people nowadays are talking about indirect technique in any any imaginary way. Yeah. But if you go back to the book, what is indirect is the fact that we do not solve a specific problem directly by saying neck free or saying back to lengthen. No, we order the whole system of movements.
So
I want to go back.
The process is not the inhibitive orders. Where my training made me think that was the process.
Yes, I know that. Yeah, I know, but it's a
good tunnel to go
through. Yeah, it's a different translation. You have to understand that the books exist, and you have to any person, even an English person that is reading Alexander in English, they have to make sense of what he's saying. So, in my words, they have to translate what the books are saying. Well, they have to. When you translate something, you want to keep close to the text. We at the moment we are in a world where the books are behind us for most teachers. Many teachers, they don't care to read the books. It's not important because they know through feelings everything. Well, it didn't start like that. So it was a necessity for me, just for practical results, to go back and find a way to translate the books so that I could, really use a self-help technique.
Yep.
So I want to change the perspective. And sometimes to change the perspective, the best thing is to use the tools of other people. Tools that I don't use, that I can't use, but that people have been using. So there is a very interesting theory that have been proposed by scientists, which are working with human movements. Mm-hmm. And if you want to search it on the internet, it's very easy. You have 3 letters, PKC, postural kinetic capacity.
Yep, I'll make sure these go in the notes.
Yeah, and it's I will certainly send you the article and the name of the person that are working, because at the moment I've only 2, and I'm afraid I forgot the name of the third scientist. There is Bouisset, Lebozec. They are French, by the way. It's not because they are French. It's written in English. Yes, yeah. And the third one I can't imagine. And they investigated rules in sitting. Well, what their problem was is what is the base adjustment in sitting?
Interesting.
It's interesting, yeah. If you're a person that is sitting all day, if you work in sitting, a pianist work in sitting, very often musician, they work in sitting, or many people work in sitting. So it's interesting to go and see what they have to say. Yeah. So let's look at the experiment first. The experiment is very simple. You have a chair, and you have a person that doesn't know what's all about. Yeah, and is asked to come and sit down and perform a gesture. Most of the time, it's a very simple gesture: pushing on a handlebar with 2 hands, or pushing on a little handlebar with 1 hand.
Yeah,
it's basic, really basic, and so. What they found is quite interesting, is quite related to orders, which are rules. You will see. So what they found is that the accuracy, the force, and the precision, which are the quality of the movement the person is asked to perform.
Yeah.
Or it's always a movement with the upper arm while the person is sitting. And they found that the global quality of the movement was dependent on a very simple factor, which is your position on the seat.
Ah.
Yeah, very strange. So how do you test that? It's very simple. You ask a bunch of students, 100 or 200 of them, to come and sit down on a chair and push. And they will take their habitual configuration of the parts when they are sitting. Yeah. And so it's very interesting that 100%. Oh, yes. And 100% of them are going to sit very far back in the chair. Mm-hmm. That's what we call first position. So the person is seated with the back against the back of the chair, and the sitting bones and the thigh are pressing on the chair.
Of course, yeah.
And then they just measure data, how the movements are performed. It's very possible to measure the precision, because when you push on something, you can have unwanted movements.
Of course.
If you want to push straight, so to push straight is not a simple matter. With the degree of freedom we are talking about, you have to understand that all the bones that are used to make linear movements are moving with angular motion.
Exactly.
So you have to transform an angular motion into a rectilinear motion. Human beings can do that more or less well. You can imagine a bow.
Yeah.
When you move a bow, for example, you have to move the bow in such a way that you have that your transformation of the angular motion into a rectilinear motion is quite good. Otherwise, it doesn't sound properly. Yes? So this is something.
Same thing with fencing.
Well, there are many. With writing is the same thing also. Yes. Well, in many different. When you want to put hands on something or move something with your hand, well, exactly the same problem occurs. So that was the first. And so they found that people tend to have a rule, subconscious one. That is, they don't think really about it. But the first thing they do when they sit is to sit far back and then to project the feet further forward.
Right.
Most people would explain that by saying that it's a stability solution. Mm-hmm. They want to increase their base. Well, scientists, they don't care. They just note what you do. So the person is filmed and seen to be doing this. And it's a habit. Mm-hmm. Because if you prevent the person from doing that, which is very simple, next experiment, you have got the same chair and the same mechanism, but there is a block on the floor. Right. You cannot project your feet further forward.
Right.
And there is a block on the chair. You cannot sit far back in the chair. You sit on the very front of the chair and your feet are very close to the chair. They are where they were when you sat. The person feels that, oh, it's awful. It's contrary to the normal use of the parts. It's awful. It feels really wrong. And then in these conditions, the person is asked to push on bar or to make a transient movement. Mm. Okay? And then, well, they observe the accuracy of the movements. And then you fall on your face. You fall on your back, I don't know, by surprise. Because in the awful conditions, second rule, sitting very close to the chair, what you discover is that the speed, the precision, the accuracy has grown so much that at first you need to remake the experiment because it looks too striking. You know, when that happens, you think, oh dear, what happens here? You want to know if the mechanism is working correctly. It's really noting accurately the actions of the person.
I'd be very curious to see what their hypothesis was.
So the hypothesis then was that there is something very clear, is that when the person looks for stability and to a habit, yes, the habit produces worse results than a new rule that provide a very, very nasty feeling to the person that is submitting herself to it. Mm-hmm. That's the first thing that is of importance. And then the second is that when the person is looking for stability, the person is increasing the support and so blocks the lower part of the torso.
That's right.
Because when you are sitting on very, very near border of the chair, what happens is that your legs are not touching. So your pelvis, which is the supporting part of the torso, your pelvis in sitting is not blocked. Mm-hmm, it's rotating around its sitting bones much more freely than when the legs, yes? And so the postural kinetic capacity, PKC, what is it? Well, freedom of movement. Mm. We find that people, as a rule, subconscious rule, want to prevent the freedom of movement of the different parts of the torso. It's a habit. Yeah, it's a social habit. Mm-hmm. Everybody does. Yeah, very, very early you will find traces of it. With children no less than 3 years of age, you can start to see it happening. Yes. Well, of course, they copy everybody that is around them. I think it's part of it. Yes. And so what they found is that when you push on something, when you use your hands, when you move any part, you're producing a postural perturbation. Hmm. And it's very simple. The postural perturbation is dynamic. It's a movement with an acceleration, a peak, and a deceleration. It's dynamic. And so they found that in order for the quality of movement to increase, you have to respond to a dynamic perturbation with a dynamic counter perturbation. And the more parts you can include to counter the dynamic perturbation, the better. Right. So if you immobilize the lower part of the torso, you have less mobility, yes, and so you're less accurate, less precise, and the speed's different. So you think, oh dear, have I not heard that before? Is it not something that we are always discussing, mobility of the different parts of the torso? Mm-hmm. So then, now the difficult part is coming. Because when you read a scientific article like this, or when you read Alexander, then you're confronted with rules. What is it am I going to do? Am I going to be influenced by science? Because these results have been tested. You know, they are not an opinion. They are not, well, I think so. No, it's a tested result.
Yeah.
So from a tested result, you want to influence your own behavior. Alexander didn't like the word behavior. I have no such problem. I say, well, my behavior is what I do all the time.
It's a very simple thing.
Yeah, it's a very simple thing. I am teaching all day sitting because I teach on. Yes, I have a person in front of me and I'm teaching sitting. Well, how do I sit? That's the question, you know. You have to, rules are fantastic to help you answer question fast.
Yes.
Rules are aids to the decision. So if you know a rule, for example, I know that I will be performing better, I will be enhancing, and I will be changing my habit if I sit very near the board of the chair with the feet exactly where they were when I sat. I inhibit any movement dictated by, oh dear, I feel it's tight. Oh dear, I feel it's my legs are getting numb. I feel you can feel oh dear, I've had students tell me your technique could be very useful if it was not so painful on the bum.
I remember those days. I got over it. I did a bit.
Yes,
you did do a little bit more strength training, and you know.
So
you get stronger.
So the rules are there to help you to find an answer. My feelings are asking me a question. Yeah, well, most of the time when the feeling asks you a question, it's more like, stop sitting like this, you crazy man. Stop it. Yeah, because something that has been forgotten in all this is what I call the history of the system. Fine. You are used to having your legs forward, away from the torso when you sit, when you're sitting. So you spend days like this. Yes. And when you're tired, you tend to have want to have the feet even further away. What happens when you do that is that the top part of the thigh shortens.
Of course.
Yes, it's the muscle that is pushing the feet away. You know, so you get into the habit of having that muscle short. When you're standing, that muscle, will do what is always doing, shortening. And so you will see that you have a very marked lumbar curve, and you can't get rid of it. And the hours you spend in school will increase that, unless you learn rules. I just teach rules to people, and I help them to feel bad. If you want to create detachment, the idea is not to find a technique to make you feel good, like most people think it's necessary. Yeah. No, the first thing you need nowadays is to learn to feel bad.
Keep going. Sorry.
And so what will happen is that your habitual movements, so you can have restriction movements. You can you can restrict the freedom of the torso by using the legs, as in sitting. You can restrict it by using your hands or your elbows to prop yourself anywhere. Yeah, there are all sorts of ways to stop the movement of the torso. Well, if you do stop the movement of the torso, of course, other muscles are going to be needed in order to maintain your state of activity. Yes. And you're going to overuse these muscles, of course. So an imbalance is going to be created. And that imbalance, at first, Alexander talks very often of the conditions. The word that comes back every now and then in his books, the conditions are not ready, the conditions are such. What is he talking about, the conditions? Well, it can be very simply translated. you have to understand that if you use a word that is work, it's in the old days, Alexander called the technique the work.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
work is a perfectly correct word. It's not a foul word. It's a correct word. Yeah, just mean that you're in fact having an activity with that. You're having a movement with that part. You accept the movement of that part, and that movement, that work, will in fact affect all the tissues that are connected with the segment you're moving or refusing to move all the time.
So that's the condition.
Tissue. Yeah, the conditions. And so, well, yes, we have to talk about the conditions of the tissues because it's very, very clear that all the tissues respond to work. And the bad thing is that they also respond to absence of work, to lack of work. Yes? So what it means is that if you take a ligament, for example, a ligament is made of collagen, and it's a very, very strange structure. That if you do pull on a ligament, what will happen? Its elastic resistance will increase. It's fantastic. It's like a spring you've got in your back that is going to maintain your torso. Instead of collapsing, the spring is there and has got the potential resistance so that you will have to do nothing and it will maintain there. Yes, but if you learn to release it, so it's what we call absence of work. You can completely relax and lie down and become limp. Alexander used the word flaccid. No life, no energy. But it's not only momentary. The more you release in that way, the less the elastic resistance of the tissue is going to be when you need it. So you won't have it.
Yes, of course.
The idea is that Alexander is with this idea of release is very, very nasty. He doesn't like it one bit. He says if it's a habit of mine of trying to find release or trying to find a solution in doing nothing. So it's clearly inactivity that is creating the wrong conditions and not what people. It's very much simpler to work with an overtense person than to work with a flaccid one. Mm-hmm. It's absolutely clear that you will find lots of initiative anyway, even if the person is overtense, and then the person will accept, tensing elsewhere. Because yes, in the old initial Alexander technique, the principle was to use rules to work, not to use rules to relax and wait and be happy. So we are mostly unhappy people, are we not?
Well, I think something just dawned on me about when you're talking about rules and so many instances of, I'm always my own student, but also working with other students. We are come across instances where people are wanting to seek Alexander technique, wanting to seek a different way, but there is a habit of being ruled, but by someone else thought of their a behavior in a time that has now passed. And that is almost more easier to grab onto than to teach someone a system of rules that they understand, that they know that is safe, that they can put into action, and that all of a sudden using their own sense of, I suppose, their sense of agency or their own sense of taking control of something becomes almost paralyzing because the habit is to listen to other people's rules.
Yes, I understand what you say.
It's a fascinating thing because the biggest sort of there's a famous pianist who says, well, you're going to have to believe you're going to walk on water. You're going to go out there and you're going to play that music. You're just gonna, sometimes there's a leap, and the leap is, what can happen? I'll count to 3, I'll watch the video.
Yes, I want to go back on this and explain one other tool that we used in the videos that is very important. It's the dialogic reasoning. It's a way to get out of just believing someone because someone says something. Is just to enter in a conversation, a logical one. I say, I gave you this order and these orders. You said you understood them separately, and when you performed them, you did. We saw this and that happen. My question is that part of the plan, or don't you think it's part? Or do you think it's not part of the plan? And the person will reason and say, no, that is wrong, isn't it? No, I say, I didn't say it's wrong. I say, is it part of the plan or not? It's not part of the plan. Good. So it's something we are going to work with. We are not expecting people to be able to perform the movement we want. There is an idea that there will be unwanted movements. When you want the third part of the torso to move back and up, for example, there will be unwanted movements. We just want to see them. And they are different for every pupil. So when the pupil sees his own movements as true, because that's what's appear on video, then suddenly the reasoning is, do we want that movement next time you perform the same procedure? And the person will say, no, we don't. Okay? How are we going to solve that problem? Because you will find that movement is habitual. Every time you move that part, this one is going in the same direction. We don't want it. Okay? So is it sufficient to think I am not going to move that part while I move the other? You cannot answer the question. You have to go back into the procedure and do it again. So you give yourself the same orders and you think in yourself, okay, I'm going to move this, this, and this, but that part, I want it to stay there. Fine. And you perform. You enter into a realm where you need to experiment. You don't need to believe. You don't need to trust. You don't need to aspire, wish something, and walk on water. One day I will. One day I certainly won't walk on water. Yes, it's not part of I am not in that realm. Okay, so when the person is going to test, experiment, then we will look back on the video and say, consciously control what you see now. Did it work? No. But was it marginally better? No. Dear. So inhibition in that sense doesn't work. What could work? Well, it's a question. And very often students say to me, are you asking me the question? Yes, I am asking you the question. So, what is it? How do you answer then?
Yes.
I have no idea. See, yes, there is a possibility. It's a gambit. It's to give the answer you want. Well, any answer, anything. You know, it may be completely stupid, but well, try. Let's go. So we say, well, there is something and it's moving in one direction and I don't want it to move in that direction. I want to see it stable. What could I do? Well, we are using instructions of movements, aren't we? Mm-hmm. So the students say, yes. I say, well, the part you see is moving in this way, and you want to stabilize it and so that it stays where it's at the beginning. And the students say, yes. But we are using orders of movements. Yes, we are using orders of movements. Is it possible to imagine an order of movement that will, you mean a counter movement? I didn't say it, you said it. Okay? So the student then starts to, well, of course, you have to help the student sometimes reason with we have got elements, mental elements. There is a mental element in the question. There is a mental element in the perspective in which we are asking the question, how can I use all this in order to produce an hypothesis?
Exactly.
Okay. So you mean that in order for that piece to stay on the same line, I would need, if I see it go back, when I pull something else backward, I would need to pull it in the opposite direction? In the create, like you would say, an antagonistic action? Well, yeah, it sounds familiar somehow. Yes, why not? Well, you haven't got anything to lose. For the moment, we see that every time you're trying to do what we want, you're doing what we don't somewhere else. So it's very interesting to use that dialogic system of asking questions so that at first it's very clear that I am propping the question. I am helping. I am constructing like a system where the pupil can stand on and reach higher. A scaffolding. It's a Vygotsky idea of using the mental capacity powered by words in order for the person to start connecting things together. But after a while, during the lesson, the pupil gets used to it. He's using to think. He's using to reason.
Yeah.
He's not going to stop at the lesson. He's going to go into his own activity and think, okay, dear, so I am sitting here and where are my feet? Okay, that's my habit. When did I do a movement that produced this? That's the moment, the critical moment I have to find. And you don't have the teacher in your pocket. You don't have the teacher on your shoulder. It's a system that you have acquired. It's a very basically helping people to think. No, sorry, helping people to reason. Because to think, you can think of what you feel all day, and you will not get further on the job. No, it's being able to connect and link things together. So, yes, there are many tools in the lessons, but all these tools are for the person to find ways to create problems. Well, it's like the opposite of every single technique I know. Most techniques, they try to make you feel good. So we don't. It's clearly to find how bad you can feel and how well you can perform. It's a different realm. And also, it's about not having the mind go quiet. I am quiet. I am the next guru in line. Well, there are so many around. No, it's not about getting quiet. It's about getting active. And what is the gist of it?
Mm-hmm.
The more you go on this job, and the more you're able to find new problems.
That's fantastic.
The more problem you can find, it means that you're getting there. If suddenly you've got some smile on your face and realization, you've lost it. It's very simple. You've lost it.
Well, you can be happy along the way of solving and coming up with new problems. That's for sure.
Of course. Yes, but that's
a different kind of happiness.
Yes, if you want to market this, it's quite difficult, I think. People don't want. It's only when they get into the work that you can find the real gem, the real fantastic thing these guys have discovered. Because I said these guys have discovered. So Alexander is talking about poise. He's talking about mobility of the different parts of the torso. Our French scientists are talking about PKC, postural kinetic capacity. Well, very much earlier. There was something else. It was a law. It's like a law is just above the rule. There is the rules. Rules are making laws, and there is a law. Or rules are, in fact, come from the laws. You can the law of dynamic wealth. What is the dynamic wealth? The law of dynamic wealth was invented in 1833. By a guy called Delsart. And the law of dynamic wealth is very simple. The more parts you can have in a gesture, the more power of expression you get.
Yes,
it's exactly the same. as sitting very near the border of the chair with the feet very close to the chair. One day, I asked Margaret Goldie. I said to Margaret Goldie, "You're sitting very near the edge of the chair. Why?" And she said, with a very nice accent, "You're asking too many questions." No, I wanted to know something. I wanted to know if Alexander told his students to do that, because I've noticed that no one of them was doing it. When I was younger, in the 90s, I went to many conferences where the old first generation students were, and I was back observing them, taking pictures. I've been doing that time. I wanted to see what fantastic beings would look like. And I found that very few of them, only women, were using the border of the chair, which made me think that it may have been something discussed, but it was not part of the general consensus of what the teaching was about.
So the women were sitting like the PKC second group.
Yeah.
They were sitting to the front of the chair.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Some of them. Yes. The ones that were in the there is what we call the closed circle. So the closed circle is Alexander, Margaret Goldie, Ethel Webb, and his brother, and the other secretary, Irene Tasker. Mm-hmm. These formed in the first training school. This was the closed circle, and there were the others, and there were also the one I call the revolutionary one, the one that didn't accept that Alexander didn't want to teach them how to put hands.
Right.
These were the other group, which in fact founded what we know as modern Alexander technique nowadays. Right. These ones had no idea. When I have many pictures of all these and sitting far back in the chair with the legs very far away, at ease.
I'd love to see your de-identified album someday. I might have to take the trip.
Okay. Have you got? I think we've gone over the hour, so
it's okay.
I can go on all day. You know that.
Yes,
so,
I do.
Please,
I think.
Tell me if you have another question or if we.
It's just been fantastic to always hear it. I hear it again, and I hear new things into it. I listen to the videos of old lessons, and I discover new things, and I do the work, and I discover new things. It's just been great to have this conversation. Thank you so much for your time. And then next time we meet, we might have to, I don't know, dig more deeper into maybe Delsarte and how your book is coming along, and things like
don't
that.
Talk about it.
Don't talk about it. I'm making you nervous.
My mother-in-law has said something, and when she says something, of course you listen. Oh, you don't, but I do. And she said, I'll believe it when I see it.
That's a nice threat to have from your mother-in-law.
Yes, because I've been working on it for 12 years, so I understand our trepidation. No, it's not trepidation. It's she does not believe in it anymore. But it's coming along. Very often when I read what I'm writing and I say, no, I can't publish that. We'll see. I think I will.
You will.
I will.
You will. You'll figure it out.
I will create. Yes.
You will create new problems.
I'm still looking for a title, by the way.
All right. Well, maybe you can have a competition. Come up with a title for my book. Put out the synopsis. Thanks so much, John Doe, for being on the Feynman Factor, and we'll catch you on the next interview. Thanks again.
Okay. Thank you very much. Bye, Mastane.
Bye.